Kristian. Good to see you.
You too, Pietro. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure, man. I mean, I followed the live session that you did with the god of horology, Jean-Claude Beaver, during the worst days of pandemics, and that was quite entertaining. So it's a pleasure to be here, man. Seriously, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a bit of a master for me during lockdown. I just, we all pushed to get educated more and more, and that was my way.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I love your background. I mean, I'm in my bedroom to get a little bit of peace and quiet.
So, I am next to my bedroom, so we nearly.
Okay. Well, lucky you. Yeah. Excellent.
I just have here a few of the people I admire, like Jimi Hendrix and Lane Staley. Those people that use their head to make bold decisions in their life, which is why I love the independence. That's where it all started. How are you, Kristian? Everything is good?
Yeah, actually, everything's really, really good. I mean, traveling is really intensifying again. I was away for 18 days already in September. It's crazy. So being in Denmark, you don't feel the pandemic. We don't have to wear masks anywhere. But when you go to the airport, you are reminded that there's still a pandemic going on. And no matter which country I have visited for the last 3 months, you have to wear a mask. We are extremely fortunate here in Denmark to be able to walk around without wearing a mask. So in Denmark, we see full faces. We don't see half. So it's good. How are you, Pietro? How's everything in the UK? Everything is picking up, or?
Yeah, we have a little fuel crisis at the moment because some people have a great idea to leave the European Union a few months back, as you may have heard, and now some backlash is happening. Yeah. As people are treating it as a surprise, but I don't necessarily see it that way. But let's not get into that. But I think, if anything, the pandemic has given us some extra strength in actually deal with adversities in a completely different way, I think. So whatever happens now is a smaller deal to what it would have been without, that massive experience we've all been through.
I think I actually just wrote quite a long article on, and this is right down your alley here, how well the independent watch brands are doing during the pandemic, because they were already used to, I know we're going to touch this subject today, of course, how the independent watch brands were actually used to talking to the clients already. If you take Dewitt, they have 300 watches a year. You take Urwerk, 150, etc., etc. I mean, they have a straight, direct line to the collectors. So they were not as dependent on the brick and mortar and the authorized retailer links. But if you are Richemont, if you're a watch group, Kering, LVMH, etc., you were depending on open stores. So I think I think the problem right now, I mean, if we talk about waiting lists of the usual suspects, the APs, the Pateks, the Rolex watches, etc., a lot of people they actually looked elsewhere, so they looked to the independent brands. I was talking to this collector friend of mine, and he just recently started collecting watches. Of course, he went the usual suspects. He went for the vintage Rolex, and he also wanted to collect Patek. But he said, I can't get it. And that made me turn away from the brand. So instead, he actually just ordered the Moser Streamliner Perpetual Calendar. But he said something very important, which I think is a great part of my article. He says, I'm an entrepreneur. He sold a couple of companies. So he wanted to collect watches for some of the money that he earned. But as an entrepreneur, he said, I know how hard it is to work to get ahead in life. So I want to support the independent watch brands because I know where they come from. And I never thought of that. And maybe this also explains the interest of mechanical watches in Silicon Valley. Once your app company has been estimated worth $1 billion, you buy yourself a Tesla to invest in the future, and you buy yourself a mechanical watch to invest in nostalgia I guess. What is your take on this, Pietro?
It is. So, Kristian, you're a master in introducing, the hot topics straight away, and I'm really happy you've done that because at the limited edition, for those that are tuning just now, we're discussing the world of independent watchmaking. We are the limited edition. We are a platform that is fully focused 100% on independence. It's very, very easy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, Kristian, 80%, 85% of our collectors are all entrepreneurs. So you touched a key point.
Precisely.
It is absolutely, there is a narrative there. When you're buying a redundant object, because a mechanical watch is arguably a redundant object that you buy for pleasure, that pleasure is to kind of give you something for what you are as a person, because ultimately we are expressing something when we are wearing a watch. And for entrepreneurs, it's become apparent to me now that the quirky names of independent watchmaking are fulfilling that emotion and that need for an emotion better these days. I was going to ask you, do you think that the mainstreams had to readjust? Because, I come from Richmond Group. I have worked for bigger brands in the past, so I kind of seen it all. Like you've been in the business for a while. You know very well, like you just said, mainstream watch brands, for as successful as they can be, but the business model is distribution, retailer, customer. Whereas, and if you put it in a line, and whereas the independence is creation, customers, basically.
Yeah.
If we are lucky, like we have been lucky, we are facilitating that to happen. So we are maybe the only kind of middle structure in between. Do you think the issue, every time there is a big crisis, if you're based on distribution volumes and retailers, brick and mortar retailers, you will see very hard days because, of course, the chain is breaking up somewhere and you're stuck. Do you think the problem then is what? The producing for retailers to stock in the 5 corners of the planet? Is the problem is the business model, or do you think really there is a maturity about the market where there is more and more people wanting to show something that is completely out of the ordinary?
I think there are several ways to look at this demand. First of all, the craze about the Nautilus, the craze about the Royal Oak, the craze of whatever modern Rolex right now also creates not only an aggression towards the brands, but also the fear of wearing a uniform. I think we should not all drive an Audi. I mean, it's a great car, don't get me wrong, but I couldn't see myself driving an Audi. And I think that once this craze has gone to all corners of the world, as you say, you tend to make up your own mind. And I think if I was a young collector today, I would sit in front of my screen for hours and read other people, the scholars, and I would read everything that other collectors would teach me, and then I would trash it all. And then I would start to believe in myself, to actually believe, when I started to collect watches back in the 90s, yeah, I'm that old, I bought watches that I liked and could afford. Collecting today is also being somewhat of a shopkeeper, if you like. You buy to invest in the monetary values, not in the emotional values. And that has changed. I remember I have family in Hong Kong, as you know. So once in a while I go to Hong Kong, and of course I go to the usual suspects and window shop, if you like. And I remember back, and this is 2015, this is 6 years ago, there was a 5980 Nautilus chronograph sitting in the window. So I went in there with my girlfriend, and I actually asked for a 5711, and he said, "We don't have it right now, we'll get one tomorrow, but we can't offer you more than 10% discount."
Yeah.
This is 2015. Yeah. This is, the world has gone mad within 6 years. But what we still should remember is when Max Büsser and Friends, the MB&F, when that came out, was in 2005, that was something crazy. The transparency, you would know who did the strap, who did the crystal, who designed the boxes, who took the pictures, the and friends thing. It was brand new. Max Büsser started a trend that only slowly became something. Because if you are a collector, you must have Rolex and Patek. And maybe you
remember those days when the first MB&Fs and the first Urwerks as well.
Absolutely.
They were in the brick and mortar retailers for 5-6 years easily, because of course there was that education happening in those days.
Yes.
To understand. I totally relate to what you're saying here.
I think only the most sophisticated watch collectors, and when I say sophisticated, I mean knowledgeable. I think they were the only ones to understand Uhrwerk, MB&F. I mean, we can all relate to Max Büsser's freckled head, his childish brain, the way he's inspired by everything when he was a boy. Because I think that a lot of the toys that we buy today as a grown-up were dreams when we were kids. We would dream about space. We would dream about being Jacques Cousteau's of the world. We would dream whenever we open a National Geographic and see the men that climbed the mountains, that dove deep into the ocean beds and just were real men. And I think that inspiration from childhood toys is very clever of Max Büsser to promote. See, when you look at the very first Uhrwerk, they actually used ETA movements. They explained and they changed the perception of reading time. Until, of course, you dive into it and you see the star wheels and the vintage Pateks that also use little satellites. I myself, I have a Gorilla, the Eloise, where you have the turning discs as well, inspired by exactly the same way of telling the time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You know exactly how this works. But it takes education, and I think that every independent watch brand takes education. One of my good friends, Theodore Deal, Ted, who works for Richard Mille for many years, he introduced me to Kari Vuotinainen. I didn't understand what Kari was all about. I knew that he was a fellow Scandinavian, if you like, up from the cold north. So used to the darkness and working with the hands when the sun goes down very early in Finland. But all of a sudden I realized, and now we're going back to talking crisis. Kari will never ever see a crisis. He makes around 50 watches a year. There will always be 50 collectors that are able to afford one of his amazing, fantastic watches. And I think when you are in that level of very creative yet traditional craftsmanship, they are winning. But also today, I think that the big brands, the conglomerate and the Pateks and the Rolex, et cetera, they are pushing people towards the independent watch brands. And it's not at all a bad thing.
That was my next question, because it's been suggested also from, I'm reading in the comments, and thank you guys for being so active today. Mark arguing that the stupidity with the wish lists or waiting lists actually created an increased interest in indie watches. And it is an era of social media manipulation, and I think in this case, Mark actually refers to those subscriptions that are pumped and pumped and pumped from the marketing point of view to create that incredible hype that then generates scarcity afterwards. But I wanted to bring the discussion on a very pragmatic point, Kristian. Do you think, because there is a perception that has slightly changed, you know how marketing used to create value? So good marketing, you know, for example, having George Clooney or Cindy Crawford or having, you know, the big stars wearing your watch would create that substantial equity that a brand was carrying with itself that was perceived as value in, you know, you know, I studied in the 90s as well, and that was the marketing at the time. Whereas now, inner value is the name of the game in watchmaking in so many ways. So a lot of collectors have the impression that when they buy an independent watchmaker timepiece, the delta between the retail price and the inner value, or the cost of actually making that artisanal object, is actually smaller than the delta that you will find when you buy a timepiece from a mainstream brand that is distributed in the traditional way in the four corners of the planet. So pragmatically, do you think there is an argument there as well, on the actual value of what you are ultimately getting?
Well, first of all, hello, Charisma. Good to see you here. No, I think marketing is what drives the watch industry. Of course it is. I mean, the more money you have for marketing, the better you will perform. There's no doubt about that. I mean, Rolex is one of the biggest advertisers in the world when it comes to advertising the horology. They don't have to do much. I think when they did the Rolex way, I thought they didn't have to. They didn't have to advertise it like that. I mean, we already know that the best secret about Rolex is the secret. So let's just keep it like that. But what I do like about the independent watch brands, they don't have the marketing budget at all. They don't even have 1/100th of the dollar spent when the conglomerates, they promote their brands. And that is why we should value what they do so much more, especially when they have success. We still have to imagine that a mechanical wristwatch is a very obsolete product. There's no doubt about that. Of course, people will argue, and actually the gentleman from Czapek, he told me, time is not obsolete. How can you say that? And of course he's right. Time is not obsolete. But I think we also enjoy our timepieces as wonderful pieces of art. Because if you think of time being obsolete, time is actually one of the saddest things we have in life. Because every time I look at my watch, here's another 3 seconds of my life, and I can't get it back. So if you look at it like that, it sucks, right?
Would you not say more than obsolete? I would say anachronistic, because literally obsolete is something that goes out of use or out of fashion, like an Apple Watch would do, because an Apple Watch in 2 years, either you get an update or you move on to the next model, whereas your mechanical timepiece in 300 years will still be here doing the same function it is doing for you, like now, one of the old masters, timepieces that we're still admiring today, is more the anachronistic use that we make of it, of the fact that we don't care if the timepiece is telling the time. We actually use it as an expression of our personality.
I mean, I think we already had the very talented watchmakers like George Daniels, of course. We have fantastic British watchmakers that have made amazing watches for several decades already, but they never had the money or the need to communicate. But I think if we just jump to what people call the wish lists, yes, Surab, I'm having wine. Sorry about that. Inseparable.
Kristian, as a side activity, we make wine in Italy as well. So I'll have to send you a bottle of our red as well. I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. No, the thing is, you have to shine. When you are an independent watch brand, you need to shine. You need to be able to explain how it works. Take, for instance, Greubel Forsay. It's always Robert explaining. So when you are a couple, it's also Felix from Urwerk. The other guy is the introvert watchmaker, and that is the perfect couple. That one works really hard, the other one also knows how to communicate. It's like you have the one at the back and you have the one at the front of your shop, right? Yeah. So one produces milk, the other one sells the milk, and I think that is the wonderful relationships of independent watch brands. Also, and now I'm going to say Renault Papi. When I was with AP 2 weeks ago, they told me, Kristian, it's not called Renault Papi any longer. It's called RPAP. Okay, R2 detail, if you say so. But a lot of talents have been educated at Renault Papi, for sure. And if you take the Grönefeld brothers, who, by the way, 2 weeks ago claimed all sold out. See, that's what I want to go back to as well. You know, the big brands, Patek, Rolex, etc., have pushed the collectors to look at the independent watch brands. But also with the hours and hours and endless hours in front of the screen during the worst days of the pandemic, we started to look elsewhere, and the communication of the independent watch brands was so good that we started to look into it. And that today has created waiting lists at the independent. So what do we do, Pietro? Should we stop wearing watches because everybody is having waiting lists?
I often have these conversations with independents, and I always say, be very careful now with the success that you have attracted, because it could generate a similar kind of effect, because artisanal goods, by definition, will have waiting lists. But I think it's how you manage the waiting lists that is the big thing. Although, Kristian, we're taking for granted that brands like Rolex, Patek, AP actually masterminded the situation of creating scarcity to create hype. But Rolex recently released an official communique to Yahoo News, and by saying that never ever they wanted to create artificial strategy. Is the demand that is gone absolutely at an overwhelming level compared to the offer. And they are trying to build the new facilities as we speak and trying to meet that demand. Of course, is this like trash talk or do we have to believe? I mean,
listen, yeah. I was really looking forward to read that article as well. And it told me nothing. There was no name. It was Rolex talking. There was no name, Pietro. It was that article just told me what my retailers tell me. There was nothing new in that. They didn't. I mean, they're so diplomatic in their way of communicating, and they don't want to make any wrong moves or step on the wrong stone. Rolex is such a proper. It's like your proper grandmother who does nothing wrong, and you respect her so much for that. But you can't make her dance on Christmas Eve because that would ruin her dress. Rolex is that kind of watch company. I love them. I mean, I love Rolex to bits, but they're so proper that it's once in a while it gets boring. And I think if I would say now, and probably Rolex is listening because they're everywhere, they're big brother. If I said, oh, Rolex has no sense of humor, I would probably get a written letter in my mailbox tomorrow with 10 bullet points on why Rolex is funny. Rolex is that kind of company. Now, if I go to the Grönefeld brothers, I will have 10 beers before it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so will Jørn Werdelin from Linda Werdelin. Jørn and I, we will have emptied 2 bottles, talking about wonderful watches in Portugal, enjoying the wonderful sun before it's 3 o'clock. I mean, the human qualities, the emotional values of a real physical relationship, that is very much the independent watch brands. Everywhere we go around the world, you will see Max. Max will hang out with you from Max Büsser and Friends. Kai Wutsinainen, even though he's a Finnish guy, he's a wonderful, wonderful person. And we will realize that when we start to respect their products and dig into it. If you knock on Kai's door, he will open it.
It's like if the independence brought back the human element that was left behind in the years we've lived from after the war, the war till probably until the first AHCI guys came about, yeah. Vincent Calabrese, Ben Andersen, where the human element was a bit left behind in favor of the corporations, whereas now the human element has come back big time, and people are starting to identify themselves into these guys that they see being successful, doing something completely anachronistic, I guess. And how much do you like, Kristian, because this is another thing, how much do you like the fact that there are no boundaries anymore? I mean, also being based in Switzerland or being based in Finland, Russia, Holland, Germany, the US as well, with names like Shapiro, Spitz, for example, or Czech Republic, Austria. Independent watchmaking is really now become an international kind of thing, after years and years of Swiss domination in a way.
I think it's really funny because the Japanese, they forced the Swiss industry to their knees during the 70s and 80s. And then we started to laugh about the mass production. Oh, it has to be mechanical. And now when you see the independent Japanese companies, we have so much respect for them, because we know that the Japanese independent watch companies, they take care of this as if it was a samurai sword, handmade. So the traditions of Japan really reflects in their timepieces. That is incredibly cool. But as you say, are you an independent watchmaker? You can be from anywhere. If you, as a kid, you would take everything apart and know exactly how the wheels and the sprockets work, you can make a wonderful watch. So I think that it's all about traditional watchmaking. Yeah, sure, you can throw in an enamel dial right there, but the movement all of a sudden has become outrageously important again. How it's made, how long it takes you to make it, how you decorate your movements, etc., etc. Oh, sorry, Ressange from Belgium. Absolutely, Tony, you're absolutely right. Ressange is one of those wonderful independent watch brands. I remember when we saw them in the booths in Basel. With this crazy rotating. I called it the blind people watch, because no matter if you close your eyes and you touch a Ressange, you know exactly what it is. It's a Ressange. It's a wonderful watch. And I think that with the closure of Basel World as well, which was the main fair for the independent watch brands, they needed to communicate themselves. And the pandemic has pushed them, because they're used to Zoom, and they're used to Team, and they're used to Skype meetings with collectors. And that, I think, the digital platforms and the pandemic, it's weird to say the pandemic somewhat saved the independent watch brands, because if you talk to Dewitt or you talk to Urwerk, they say, we had 6 months of nothing, absolutely nothing. We were paralyzed. There was nothing, and then they started to communicate on the digital platform. So the funny thing is, the digital communication has saved the mechanical watch industry, I think.
Absolutely, and it was one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you. But by the look of it, Kristian, we will need another session, because
yeah, we do.
It's so smooth, the conversation, that I think there's so much to discuss, and I don't want to take away anything from those people that are following us. There are a few questions on the line.
Oh, we love Akrivia, of course, Europe. I mean, we love Akrivia. We love what he's doing, but he's also moving up. He said he would only produce like 30 watches a year. But now if he went to Geneva, he bought the opposite store where he's doing a workshop as well. And I think he's moving into the 50s, maybe even 60s and 70 watches a year. So Recep and his brother are definitely moving up in terms of quantity.
Absolutely, and it's one of those brands that will have the nice problem to have of fulfilling the demand that is already absolutely huge. But yeah, to get back to what you're saying, yeah, the digital and the importance of the digital and the importance of direct communication between people. That yes, like we all need being educated about new brands, newcomers, new watchmakers. But if the education is done directly from a digital platform, it's much easier to get the access and to get the understanding. You've been a pioneer in that respect, Kristian. I'll give you that absolutely and completely, because you've been one of the very first to understand the power of the digital and the fact that honest and genuine marketing, without calling dishonest the traditional marketing, but you know what I mean, focusing on the real stories, on the real deal, on what we're doing now, it's useful because people these days relate only with reality and with things that are genuine. Did you say it straight away from, when you started to think about the digital, was that your objective, to bring over honest, straightforward communication, direct communication, or was it something that grew into you and your understanding as well?
I think when I started it back in the days, it wasn't even called a blog. I mean, it was just a website where you would talk about watches. I saw it as an easier way to actually talk to the enthusiasts, and it was not a matter of call to action at all. but it was a way to get more news out without waiting 2 months until the magazine that you wrote for would actually publish your articles. So that was definitely a call to action. When Instagram, for instance, became a thing, I joined them in 2012. It was not only watch related when I started it. There was also pictures of my bicycles or whatever. But I think that Instagram today has played and still plays an enormous part of the success of the mechanical wristwatches, as well as promoting the independent watch brands. There's no doubt about that. If they're not on Instagram, they probably don't exist a lot. So it's very interesting. But there's another subject. I was actually with Omega in Milan just last week. They were introducing the Speedmaster chronoscope, and I asked Ashliman, the CEO, if he was ready, because over the next 10 years, it's going to be another 150 million people becoming middle class, and they want to watch as well. And I asked him if he was prepared for that demand, because Switzerland can only educate that many watchmakers, and you can only expand your facilities that much. Switzerland is not a huge country. And he said, yeah, sure, we are prepared, but I don't think they can be prepared. I think one of the few things that the middle class, they love to pamper themselves with is a mechanical watch, and especially from Omega, Tag Heuer, and Rolex. That's like the beginner brands of middle classes. And I can't see the mechanical watch to, become affected by a crisis again, as long as they can produce and deliver. But like we should get used to wearing a mask, so certain places around the world, we have to get used to waiting lists. The mechanical watch will be a rare thing. And also during the last 10 years, a lot of companies have actually died. And the export of mechanical watches is definitely on a decline. So it's the plus 1,500 Swiss franc watches that is definitely increasing, but everything below that is really tough. That has been outsmarted by the smartwatch, I'd say.
Yeah. It is an interesting point of view and perspective on the fact that we take things for granted, but things are not that granted for the future. If you want an artisanal product, you have to be prepared to kind of fight for it in a way, because these guys are actually artisans. One of my battles, Kristian, is also, and one of the reasons why I'm always excited about the independence is that I believe in independence. Also, there is a great watch for any wallet, any price point. There are every day, and this is down to knowledge and education as well. Every day, new watchmakers, they come on the scene, offer different amounts of value at a different price point. And I think that's also a very, very important point to not create a category of disillusioned collectors or aspiring collectors, because when you can't have access to the form of art you like, it is always a big issue. So do you think that is also strategic in terms of the survival of the industry and the passion that we like?
I think it's important to accept the fact that 10 years ago, or maybe even 15, you would make 5-year plans, and then the financial crisis kicked in, so you couldn't plan. You had to react and act. And I think that the watch companies have become better to actually react and act. And I think that probably is also why we all of a sudden we saw so many watches with integrated bracelets, simply because they saw, oh wow, people are going crazy on the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. We should do something about that. I'm not saying that they're replicating the top brands in terms of that, but they could see that was a trend. But if you look back during the 70s, that was exactly the same. Patek and AP were not the only ones doing integrated bracelets and certain designs, but the other ones were lesser brands today. But back then, there were big brands. And the funny thing is, if you look at the Royal Oak and you see the Nautilus, they were made to attract a new audience. Today, Thierry Stern dislikes the Nautilus line, even though he wears a perpetual calendar himself. So he's turning it down because there's an increase of interest for the Nautilus. So times are changing and everything is being different, but there's still a demand. There's still a demand. And we have to appreciate that demand because that is what makes our business. Without that, I'll be unemployed.
Absolutely. And also it is a news of only 2 years ago of the incorporation of watchmaking as a form of art, recognized by UNESCO, for example. But of course, we have been seeing watchmaking as a form of art since ever. And if you accept watchmaking as a form of art, you expect a progressive approach of trying not to replicate what has already been done. So what was new in the 70s can't be progressive enough, these days you can't satisfy everyone.
No, not at all. But listen, Pietro, I'm losing daylight now. We have to do a second episode on this because I have to run off. I thought we had 30 minutes and now we're running on 41 minutes. Listen, Pietro and dear listeners, we are going to follow up on this within the next 2 weeks. How does that sound, Pietro? Would that be good?
It's been fun, Christian. If you're up for it, I'm sure that everyone enjoyed it and we can do it again. I had a full list of topics and I have touched only 2 or 3. So, we can go for it.
Let's do it again, Pietro. Listen, thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. Let's come back. And if you do a new advert, Pietro, just say it's part 2.
Fantastic. Brilliant, excellent. Christian. I'll see you soon. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Ciao.